Thank you for joining us. The need to promote Jewish life and a better understanding of the state of Israel and its achievements and its hope for peace is greater today than ever before. One of Israel's most articulate speakers is Colonel Raanan Gissin, our guest today, whom you may remember from the first Gulf War in 1991. A lot has changed in the Middle East since then, and Colonel Gissin will join us and bring us up to date following these messages.
Healthcare costs are bankrupting America. The cause is federal overregulation. Unless a free market is restored, no one, including government, business, or individuals, will be able to afford the high cost of healthcare. My new book, Pharmacracy, exposes the corruption that causes needless suffering and death while our nation sinks into financial ruin. The solutions in this book can save Medicare and improve the lives of aging Americans. Pharmacracy provides an irrefutable basis to stop the suffocating impact of healthcare regulation. The benefit will be better medical technology at far lower prices. Fight back against corruption. Pharmacracy shows how we can tear down bureaucratic barriers that push healthcare costs beyond the reach of the American people. We can do it.
This essential book is only $24, and you'll also receive a free subscription to Life Extension magazine. Get your book today.
After 2,000 years of exile, the Jewish people have rebuilt their homeland. The hope for peace and security is continuous, along with astonishing achievements. The world and Israel's neighbors have a lot to gain in mutual cooperation and peace. However, the volatile Middle East seems over the years to constantly experience one drama after another. In the last few years, we've seen what began as unrest develop into riots and violence. Some of it more dramatic, with dictators dethroned and replaced by unknown new leaders who may or may not improve their countries or contribute to peace in the region. Some of these spontaneous or orchestrated uprisings have also been suppressed. Some were supported by the West, and other uprisings, such as the protests in Iran, were largely ignored. Some countries, such as Jordan, have better relations with Islamists and opposition groups. Some people are saying that what we saw in Egypt was not a popular revolution, but a succession of power orchestrated by the military. Where this is all leading is still unknown. But we can hope to see improvements in human rights and a more peaceful, even inspiring future for all concerned. With us now is Dr. Raanan Gissin. Raanan, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show.
Pleasure to be here again after so many years.
The first time I interviewed you, good Lord, back in 1991, it was Colonel Raanan Gissin, and now, of course, people address you as Dr. Raanan Gissin. And so much has changed in the Middle East in all of these years, and I'm thinking about the so-called Arab Spring, I'm thinking about Syria, and the city of Homs, Hama actually. Wasn't it like in 1982, Assad, the father, killed more than 20,000 people back then, and nobody made a big deal about that in the world. And here we are today, 20-something years later, and what's the story now?
Well, definitely the world has changed. The world has changed around us in terms of its willingness and ability to accept such atrocities. And Syria has changed. Inside Syria, there has been change. I think, it brings us to the core of the issue of what really happened with the Arab Spring. What was the driving force of I would say, this young revolution that was driven, according to some experts, by the new technology, Facebook, the social networks. And it takes a little bit discussion into that. And you have to understand the basic factor that enabled Assad in 1982, Assad the father, in 1982, to actually crush a revolution at a very costly price, so over 20,000 dead, and no one made any fuss about it, neither in Syria, not in the past, is because there was no one knew about it at the time. Today, there is almost nothing you can do without it being in headlines in the major networks or being taken by mini cameras or by your cellular phone camera and spread all over the world through satellite communication. And therefore, the regimes that before could hide things, could do things without any public awareness of that, now every step on the way, the thing is exposed. Furthermore, the Facebook revolution occurs in conjunction with another revolution that takes place in the Arab world, probably in the past 20 years or so. That's a demographic revolution. It's a younger generation of people, which comprise really the majority of the active population in the Arab countries. Over 50% across the Arab world are young people of the age of 18 to 24 who are, lack of a better definition, I call them hopeless, jobless, restless, and they want everything now. And when they don't get it, and definitely that is because of the failure of these regimes, which were not democratic, were not legitimate regimes, to provide the basic needs as well as the growing demands of this young generation. By the way, all of them are highly educated, but they don't have a job. And here comes this instrument called Facebook or Twitter, the social networks. And what it does, which did not happen in 1982, it makes these people important. Nobody knew about them before, but the new social networks make these people visible. They become icons. They become like modern secular shaheeds. And therefore, the fear factor that was before, the fear from the regime, and what was the regime going to do, turns the other way around. Now the regime is afraid of these young people because they're not afraid to go out into the streets, because in their blog or in their social network, they know that there will be 10,000, 100,000, maybe 1 million people watching them across the Arab world, and they will become icons.
But this is a very interesting point you're making. If what you're suggesting is, since obviously the conscience of mankind has not improved particularly over the decades or centuries, you're saying that in World War II, if the whole world had exposure to what was going on in the ghettos and in the streets of Germany, the oppression, the vile things that occurred then, you're saying that if the world was aware of all of this, perhaps it could have been stopped. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I would suggest that if the people in the ghettos and those who were driven to concentration had the same type of technology with iPads, with laptop computers and social networks, and they would be able to get the word out to the rest of the world, perhaps the world would have reacted differently or would have come to the. But with the technology that existed then, it was possible through the manipulation and actually not just manipulation, but the monopoly over the means of communication by the Nazi Germany. In other words, to prevent information from seeping out. And therefore, only later in the game does the world realize, and only through intelligence reports. Because you see, it's not just the information that comes out, but when the general public or world opinion knows about it, it exerts pressure. When they don't know it, the leaders are free to make decisions, like the decision not to bomb Auschwitz, not to bomb the trains that were leading to that, because that was a decision made by a small group of people based on some, I would say, very narrow military considerations. But I don't think that would have been possible if the whole world would have known it. And today the world knows. And Assad, the son, Bashar Assad, everything that he does is exposed. And not only that, the people who his father was able to suppress and to kill, and they remain silent, are not remaining silent. Every day they come out to the city of Homs, of Hama, of Damascus, of Dara, and they protest. And you know, it's contagious because it happens in other places in the Arab world. When Gaddafi fell, the people in Dara, the people in Damascus, the people in Homs were cheering. In other words, there is a new form of, I would call it, cyber solidarity. In the past, when you wanted to conduct a revolution, and a successful revolution, you needed organic solidarity. You need to bring people who are suffering together so that they can join forces and let them march, let them act. So you had to have an apparatus. You had to have a political organization to bring them. Today, the substitute for this organization or building the movement of a revolution is Facebook and Twitter. These social networks congregate these people, and when they communicate with each other, even though they haven't seen each other, even though they haven't met, they are transmitting and talking on the same wavelength. They understand each other. And that creates what I call, in the absence of organic solidarity, because they've never met, cyber solidarity.
What an interesting term, cyber solidarity. I'd like to take us back to the beginning of the State of Israel, and I'd like you to tell our audience how you see the history of the conflict between Israel and its neighbors. They should have made peace ages ago. Israel was willing to accept ridiculous boundaries that the United Nations had offered, but immediately 7 Arab armies rose to destroy Israel. The world stood by until the Jews were victorious, and then they called for an armistice. Seems that whenever Israel is winning, the world stops Israel. Well, it's the other way around. They want to see how bad things can get for Israel. But tell us a little bit about the history.
I think overall, in the past 60 years or so, everything that was there actually would have said Israel should lose. Israel cannot survive. Small in numbers, lacking of resources, with the whole Arab world, ganging up on it, in 1948, then again in 56 and 67. And yet, time and again, Israel succeeds. I think what it proves in the final analysis, after, we've taken away all the elements, the surprise element and the cunning and the by ruses thou shalt make wars, what Israel did over there, it basically shows that in the competition between those two paradigms, one paradigm that cherishes and adores death, and the other paradigm that cherishes and adores life, life won. And Israel is the paradigm that shows that despite all the hardship, despite everything that happened, despite the Holocaust where we lost 1/3 of our people, these people, because they had this strong belief in life and in its and the vision that you can bring life back, that brought this success of this paradigm. And also, Israel was the kind of nation which faced, with all these struggle and a struggle for survival, that it honed, I would say, our genes. We have the best survival genes, I think, of any other nation on earth, because we are the only one who stood facing extinction, and we prevailed. And therefore, we came out very strong. I'm involved today with remnants of the Holocaust survivors, trying to get their stories out, trying for eternity through an NGO that I work with called Flame, trying to get this on tape, on record, so that future generation will realize and you see the resilience and the spirit of these people was so strong that it inspired not only their families, but the building of the State of Israel. They came from the camps in 1945. They landed in ships that the British tried to stop, and they went straight to the battlefield to fight. And, when they integrated into the Israeli economy, they came with their innovative approach and the ability to solve problems. That's the essence of it. With Holocaust survivors and with those who came from the former Soviet Union, we are a nation of problem solvers. That's why I think we're one of the leading forces in developing high-tech software computer technology, where you need to solve problems immediately. And that's why many of the high-tech computer companies, Microsoft and Intel, are building their factories in Israel, because there is the largest concentration of brain power capable of solving problems. Except I would say, we solve the problem of the world, but, this is something that I always reflect on philosophically. Yet our own problem, internal problems, how we live with each other, how Richard lives with Raanan, how do I live with the ultra-Orthodox, that's a major challenge to Israel. Because other problem, external problem, we learned how to deal with. How do we deal with our own internal issues? Not with peace in the Middle East, but peace amongst ourselves is an issue which we'll have to deal in the next decades.
Well, unfortunately, they say if you have 10 Jews, you'll have 20 opinions.
About that.
And I was looking at an image, actually, of the Swiss government. I think they have about half a dozen ministers, whereas the Israeli government has about a whole classroom, it appears, of like 30, 40 individuals crowding around the prime minister. So, too many opinions, perhaps. I'd like us to pause for these commercial messages, and we'll be right back, Raanan. We're back with Raanan Gissin. We were thinking here about the effect of electronic cyber solidarity and how technology has had a profound influence on even political events, as shown in the Middle East. Why then has it not had the same kind of influence in other countries, even Israel?
Well, this is really an interesting question, because we did have our form of protest using Facebook and the social networks and Twitter. The Israeli summer, in the last summer of Israel, the hundreds of thousands of people came out in the street and protested the government's salary policy, economic policy, education policy, but they never challenged the legitimacy of the regime. Whereas in the Arab countries, because of the inability of these regimes to create the kind of legitimacy, they lost legitimacy. Or I would say, if in the past, legitimacy was in the palace in Damascus, as well as the power was there. Today, the power still remains in the palace, but legitimacy is in the street. The same thing in Egypt. If the legitimacy was in the palace as well as the power, it's not. Now the regime, those who sit in the palace of Al-Ittihad, where the Egyptian government is supposed to sit, are constantly seeking legitimacy from the public in the street. And that changes overnight. If they see someone that they believe is not acting in favor or killing someone in the street, they will mark him off. In the past, through fear, they were able to retain that legitimacy. But now when the fear factor has changed and the regime is really afraid of the street, of the people in the street, then they have a problem. In Israel, it didn't happen. So they say to Netanyahu, come and do something to change the policy and the protest, and the government had to heed to that. Why? Because it's a true democracy. So this is an answer to all those who claim in public diplomacy, that the major attack today to delegitimize Israel. Israel is an illegitimate country. Israel is a pariah state. Israel is an apartheid state. On the contrary, the only legitimate state in the Middle East today, which is governed by the people, for the people, which has true democracy, which the people actually accept, is the state of Israel. I mean, if there is a model that the Arab Spring countries or the Arab Spring masses should emulate, it's the Israeli model. And by the way, among some of those youngsters, they're saying, yeah, maybe we don't like Israel because of its policy to the Palestinian, but look at the Israeli model. This is a model we would like to have in our own countries.
You mentioned Egypt, and it brings to mind that whereas America expressed support for the movement to overthrow governments in North Africa, Arab countries, they did not cooperate with regard to Iran. They did help overthrow Mubarak, which I kind of wonder about. But when the people rose up in Iran, America did not support the movement against Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Why is that?
I think that is because Iran today is a major force in the Middle East, which is able to instill fear in the hearts and minds of the leaders in the Middle East. And also the United States was thinking, well, maybe we can engage. I think that was the wrong approach. Engage the Iranian regime in a dialogue so they will change their ways, mend their ways. This is part of the, I say, warped moralist view in American foreign policy that happens time and again, a naive approach. In other words, I wouldn't say that Obama was turning over backwards and abandoning American values and an American way of life and going for something different in the Muslim world. I think it's simply a naive approach that you can convince those people to see the light, to see that it's better for their people to have a free government, to have democracy. And that doesn't work. It didn't work for Bush in Iraq. And regrettably, I must say, it doesn't work even when Barack Obama bent backwards towards the Arab and tried to appease them.
Raanan, in the course of your career, after serving in the IDF spokesman's office, you were the assistant and advisor to the Prime Minister Sharon and many other individuals. Tell us of some of your experiences regarding some of these leaders, Bush, for example.
What happens is that, there's so much control of what appears in public. The public diplomacy of every government is so different than the private diplomacy, than what is being talked in, and the gap is growing, constantly growing, because there's pressure constantly to present a certain face to the audience. Perhaps after 9/11 to show that you're resilient, that you're strong, that you will fight terrorism. And then, in closed doors, you say, well, let's see how we can manage this and let's not jump into the pot right away. And I mean, President Bush, was very determined to fight terrorism, but it took a learning process to go through that process. 9/11 was the first thing, and then the fact that there were continuing attack against U.S. interests and everything. But so the president slowly moved in that direction, and no doubt I would say that special relation with the Prime Minister of Israel, who was Mr. Security, so to speak, even for the president, had an effect on his views and on his willingness really to go out and fight terrorism, in a different way, in a different manner. And even today, you look even at the operational level, the United States was very quick to copy and take some of the measures that we used against suicide bombers and against radical Islamic group target assassination, which is, according to Alan Dershowitz, is probably the most moral means of warfare in today's war. When you fight, and you want to separate hitting innocent civilians from the heads of the snake, that you go for it. And I must say that President Obama has excelled in that. He more than tripled the number of target assassination than the Bush era.
Well, and speaking of exposure, Israel is constantly maligned in the press, and there's a very serious danger that Israel is subjected to because of all of this anti-Zionism, a new form of anti-Semitism, and the tendency of the media worldwide to single Israel out for criticism and so forth. Why is Israel not enjoying better media exposure? Why is there not enough being done to promote a better understanding of Israel and its achievements?
Richard, in the 21st century, it's a different ballgame. There's a media war out there, and you have to be there all the time, full court pressure. You have to be there to prevent delegitimization, to prevent the pictures from coming. And perhaps, I would say that programs like your program are the right answer to that, the antidote, because we sit on top of the stories, we show the right side of the story when it happens. But if you wait for the other side to turn a legitimate scene of self-defense into a crime scene, and that's the way it's portrayed, then of course Israel has no right to defend itself because Israel is a criminal. Criminals have no right to use weapons. Whereas actually in reality, and we know it from the Goldstone report, we know it from all our recent wars in Gaza and in Lebanon, that Israel takes the most meticulous measures in order to avoid casualties to civilians. But the picture that you see tells the story, so you have to counter the picture.
Raanan, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. We need to do more interviews to cover more things that are coming up.
It's always a pleasure meeting you again.
Thank you. I'll be right back. This concludes our special show for today with Colonel Raanan Gissin. I'm Richard Peritz. Thank you for being with us.